everyone, and thanks for joining us tonight. It's great that you can be here. Our speaker tonight, I actually met Robert only recently because we're both involved with an international research group that is at this moment establishing itself, so I won't say too much about that. But and I was really curious about, Robert being in Germany, and because of the language difference, we don't get to hear a lot about what's going on there, except through some of their history. So I wanted to ask Robert to come along and speak to us tonight. And Robert is a TV journalist, presenter and filmmaker, and he's worked for a number of German public broadcast TV networks and writes articles for magazines in Germany and abroad. So he's founded Exopolitics Germany in 2007, and in 2013 he launched exomagazine.tv, which is a subscription-based online TV magazine for open-minded people. So Robert has a background, a university degree in conference interpreting for French and Spanish, and has given talks in many European countries, including Austria, Switzerland, Italy, Spain, Portugal, the Czech Republic, the UK, and now Australia. So welcome, Robert, and it's great to have you here, and we'd love to hear about what's going on in Germany.
Thank you so much, Cheryl, for the invitation. I feel very honored to be able to speak at your conference, even though it's only a virtual conference, but it's like the only thing we can do in those times, right?
That's right.
I was in Australia like 20 years ago for a month or so. I visited a friend in Adelaide, and we went to the Blue Mountains and Sydney, and I really loved it, and I absolutely want to return. Yeah, I really love your continent. I just love it. I love the nature. I love the people. I love everything. So it's a great pleasure for me being here. Okay, so you asked me to tell you a little bit about the situation in Germany, and I guess the language barrier is probably not the biggest problem when it comes to UFOs in Germany. It's you actually never hear anything about UFOs in Germany because UFOs don't exist officially in Germany. But I've been trying to change that for 13 years now, and something is moving. I don't want to say that it's all for me because of what I did, but I think it's maybe the zeitgeist, that is moving along. It's maybe just, mankind is about to travel to the stars, is about to expand itself into the universe, and maybe this is just about the right time to think about whether or not we are alone in the universe, and hopefully the German government will get it as well one day. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I founded in 2007, I founded exopolitik.org, which is loosely associated with the Exopolitics Institute in Hawaii of Michael Saller, but we do not work together in any substantial way. It is actually just, let's say, a loose association. And I would say that our own focuses of work is quite different from the approach of Michael Saller. Let's leave it with that. I founded that in 2007, and a couple of years later, I founded Exo Magazine TV, which is, as you said, an online video portal for open-minded people, which covers more subjects than just UFOs. And the reason I founded that was that, first of all, I kind of had to refinance my activities as a journalist because it's just not possible to follow this work. You don't make any money with UFOs, nowhere. Not in Germany, and so, and also the second reason is that once you go down the rabbit hole, and once you start to investigate UFO sightings and what it's all about, and where do they come from, and what does it mean for reality, and all of that, you sooner or later you start to become interested in other subjects like parapsychology, free energy, consciousness research, all this kind of stuff, you know. So that's why, and I have been running this for 10 years now, and it's been developing quite well, I have to say. Okay, so in Germany, there are 4 private UFO organizations, which you will probably have never heard about. The oldest ones are MUFON Central European Section, founded by an astrophysicist called Illobrand von Ludwiger. And he now has founded a new organization which is called EGAP. And it deals with the analysis of anomalies. They all do a great job in analyzing incoming UFO reports. They have a common UFO case database. They work together on certain cases, and it's not always been like this, I have to add, because when I started in 2007, the UFO field in Germany was quite controversial. It was basically dominated by one single person who pretended to be the only UFO researcher in Germany, or at least so they said on mainstream television, whereas he wasn't even head of a registered association. He was just an ideologically skeptic guy who had simple answers to complex issues, and German media loved that. And he was able to pursue his work, being the alleged only UFO researcher in my country, even though there were 3 registered UFO organizations at that time. And whenever someone came from the other organizations and said, well, but look at this phenomenon, this is really interesting, you know, he instantly beat them down. You know, he said, no, that this is just a weather balloon or whatever, you know, or Thailand, Chinese sky lanterns, or I don't know how you call that. So, but the field has changed since then, luckily. And I'm a member of 3 of those organizations, and I'm also a member of the case investigation email list. So whenever a new UFO sighting comes in, I get a notification, and I really like the way how those associations now cooperate with one another. So. If you've ever heard about anything going on in Germany in the last 20 years or so, it may have been this. In July of 2015, British media reported that the Bundestag, the German government, was allegedly forced to release a top secret UFO document cache. And Mail Online says, could German UFOs finally reveal whether aliens have visited Earth? Court forces government to release top secret documents. And the Sunday Express says Angela Merkel forced to release secret UFO files German government fought to withhold. I have to say, this is not quite the case. It's not quite what is written here, but there is something, there was something going on with a withheld government study. And I was deeply involved in this, but let's get back to how it all started in Germany, okay? In order to explain what was going on, I have to go back to the year 1978. As you may know, in 1978, the United Nations adopted a decision for interested member states to conduct research on UFOs and extraterrestrial life and to inform the Secretary General about their findings and conclusions. The original aim was to propose the establishment of a UFO study group at the United Nations level at the Outer Space Committee, but this aim was hindered by Germany's permanent mission to the United Nations, among others. So I made some research. I did some research at the political archives of Germany's Federal Foreign Office about that decision. And I found a telegram from November 28, 1978, and I'll show it here, which says, Grenada's resolution has presented a resolution draft on UFOs at the special SPC, which proposes the establishment of an expert group which is supposed to define the framework for UN studies about the UFO phenomenon under the supervision of the Outer Space Committee. And it goes on, quite apart from the wider implications of such resolution draft, the reference to the Outer Space Committee alone has its misgivings, as it would incur Grenada's desire to become a member of the Outer Space Committee, which would therefore be constantly occupied with the UFO question. The Special Political Committee will probably finish treating this item until the end of week. Until then, the USA and Austria will try to persuade Grenada to withdraw its resolution draft and to accept a more general declaration, which invites interested states to become a member of a non-UN committee for the study of UFOs. So this was, as you see, this was actually hindered from Germany from the beginning. Now, in 1993, there was an interesting development at the European Parliament, because, as you may know, in the 1990s, Belgium saw an enormous UFO wave that lasted for more than a year. Hundreds of people saw triangular-shaped craft, and as a consequence, the member of the European Parliament, Elio Di Rupo from Belgium, tabled a motion for a resolution on the creation of a European observatory for UFOs. Following months of UFO sightings in Belgium, that was the so-called Belgium UFO wave. And the European Parliament decided to set up to draw up a report on Di Rupo's proposal, and appointed the physicist and the member of parliament Tullio Regge from Italy as a rapporteur. And for his report to the parliament, Professor Regge contacted all air forces of the European Community member states at that time. And only France and Italy shared their findings with him. Spain refused to cooperate on the grounds that this data fell under the military secret. And the German Air Force stated that it was not competent in this matter. We have nothing to do with it, but it did not indicate which service was competent. And so you see from the very beginning, Germany pretended that this is a non-issue, that this doesn't exist at all. We don't deal with it because it doesn't exist. You have the former Minister of the Interior, Wolfgang Schäuble, who says in 2008, an authority or institution at the federal level which records or evaluates alleged sightings of UFOs and projects such as those described by you are not known here. Which is an interesting way to say it, is not known here. You know, he's the Minister of the Interior. He should know. And if he doesn't know, then who knows? Maybe the Ministry of Defense, you know. Okay, so there was some interest, however, from members of the German Bundestag, which is the German parliament. There was a deputy from a liberal party who wanted to know how many sightings of so-called UFOs or extraterrestrial has the federal government registered since 2000, and does the federal government intend, after the British and the French governments have published their files on UFO sightings, to also publish their files. As you may recall, in 2007, the French started to release the tons of their UFO files, which come from the official French UFO project, GEPON, the Groupe d'études et d'information sur les phénomènes aérospatiaux non identifiés, which is the study and information group for unidentified aerial phenomena. And then in 2008, the British started to release their files, and then there were all kinds of countries who suddenly started to release their files. So the German government says, we have no information on sightings of so-called UFOs or extraterrestrials in Germany. Accordingly, there are no files on UFO sightings that could be considered for publication. Another deputy from the Green Party wanted to know, what is the federal government's estimate of the probability of the existence of intelligent extraterrestrial life, and what is the estimated probability that extraterrestrials will land on the territory of the Federal Republic of Germany? And the government says the federal government has no knowledge that would permit a reliable assessment of the probability of ET life. According to the current state of scientific knowledge, the federal government considers a landing of aliens on the territory of the Federal Republic of Germany to be out of the question. Out of the question, you see? So this is a non-existing issue. There was an interesting, I had some correspondence with the with co-workers of the then Minister of Defense, Karl Theodor zu Guttenberg. And I asked him about secret German files and whether he wants to release them or not. And he said, he really said, throughout the existence of the Bundeswehr, which is the German military, there has been no case in which an initially unidentified flying object was attributed to an extraterrestrial origin. Accordingly, the Federal Ministry of Defense does not keep any records on the UFO phenomenon described by you. Keep in mind, I never asked him about extraterrestrial UFOs of extraterrestrial origin, but only about UFOs. So this is like a trick they play. When you ask about UFOs, they will answer, we know nothing about extraterrestrials. See, so, you know, in other answers from members of the public, the German military went as far as to state categorically that since the foundation of the German military, the Bundeswehr, they never had anything on their radar screens, which they could not eventually identify, which is a ridiculous statement. Because the German military claims they have never had anything unusual on their radar screen, but the Swiss have had something unusual on their radar screens over German territory. So here you see one of many radar sightings. This was on May 5th, 1996, at the NATO early warning radar station in Baden-Württemberg, close to the Swiss border. You see in this red box there, in the red square, this is where the early warning radar station is located, and you see unidentified radar returns. And this was recorded by Swiss radar, Swiss military radar. Okay, you see another example of those Swiss UFO radar traces. This is over Switzerland. You see an object that travels with around 240 kilometers per hour. And while the radar operators are trying to find out what this object is, because it has no transponder or anything, it suddenly makes a sharp right angle turn of 90 degrees and shoots away to the left. So if you think about this in terms of physics, you know, you have the mass inertia law. This is basically impossible for any known aircraft, let alone for the pilot, because he would be smashed on the cockpit window like a fly or something, you know. This is the kind of radar recordings that we have, that we know of. And they were actually smuggled out of Switzerland and handed over to the head of MUFON, to Illobrand von Ludwiger, the astrophysicist that I mentioned. He's a good friend of mine, and we've been working together. And he's also given a very interesting lecture only on those radar traces, which is highly interesting. So, so is it true that the German government doesn't have any knowledge on UFOs? In November 2009, I asked let's put it this way, a member of the German Bundestag, Gitta Konnemann. She instructed the scientific research service of the Bundestag, of the German Parliament, to draft a report on why the United Nations decision 33426 has never been implemented in Germany, and another one about how UFOs are treated by European authorities in general. And here you can see those reports, and they basically this was she asked the scientific research service to draft those reports because of me, because I have a friend who is a journalist, and he said, now I finally managed to get this deputy. What can I ask her about UFOs? And I said, well, ask her about the United Nations decision 33426 and why it was never implemented. And then he made the interview, and she said, oh, I know nothing about this, but I will ask the scientific service of the Bundestag, which is there to help and to assist members of the parliament in their decision making. And so they said in these reports, they said the fact that, let me quote this here, they said the fact that both Great Britain and France had been dealing with questions about the existence of UFOs and ET life forms and have given up their secrecy to publish it even on the internet suggests the assumption that German authorities or ministries have been dealing with that question as well. So that was a bombshell at that time. And they go on to state, the authors of these of the Scientific Research Service, they said, in addition, when the United Nations resolution was adopted in 1978, there was still a very pronounced East-West conflict mentality. At least from a military point of view, there might have been a need at the time to investigate reports or phenomena of UFOs. Yeah, this is where it says. So that was a bombshell at the time because it completely contradicted the official statement of the German government that there's no interest in UFOs whatsoever. It didn't prove that they actually investigated anything or that they were interested, but it showed that in theory, or in general, governments and militaries tend to investigate UFOs because it's just there. Okay, now after I quoted from this report, which was never intended to be public, but I quoted from it and I showed excerpts from it in one of my lectures. And then a citizen of Berlin, he saw my lecture, and he saw that I quoted from this report, and he said, well, I want to have that report too. And he made a Freedom of Information Act request to get it. And the German Bundestag denied him access to those studies. And so in 2011, he sued the German government. The German Freedom of Information Act, they said, would not be applicable to studies written by the Scientific Research Service of the Bundestag. In December 2011, the first instance administrative court in Berlin approves his request and orders the Bundestag to release the study. The Bundestag lodges an appeal. And what was at stake here at that time was not what the scientific service knows about UFOs, but whether all the studies ever undertaken by the Scientific Research Service of the Bundestag should be available only to members of the Bundestag or also to members of the public. So that was a huge legal issue, you know. Okay, in 2012, the head of a German UFO association starts writing letters to all ministries of the interior of the German federal states. The Ministry of the Interior of North Rhine-Westphalia, which is in Western Germany. He confirmed that the police forwards reports on unexplained aerial phenomena when they are related to airspace security issues to a so-called National Situation and Command Center for Air Safety. That is a NATO combined air operations center in North Rhine-Westphalia, close to the Dutch border. But the Ministry of Defense would not officially confirm that this air operations center in fact receives UFO reports from the police. Now, what was interesting, a colleague of mine who worked for a very big newspaper, actually the biggest newspaper in Germany, he called the press officer of the German Ministry of Defense, who confirmed to him on the phone that said that those reports are received by this National Situation and Command Center for Air Safety. But he said those reports end up immediately in the trash without being examined, which is a quite interesting statement and a quite interesting procedure for a command center which is tasked with ensuring air safety in Germany, isn't it? Okay. In March of 2012, a friend of mine from Switzerland, who's also a journalist, he asked another police authority in Germany how they deal with UFO sightings. And they confirmed to him that there is a procedure that there is a confidential agreement between the German federal government and the federal states of Germany to forward those reports to the National Air Safety Center. But they said we cannot reveal any more details. Now, what is this National Airspace Situation and Command Center? This is the only official photo you can get on the internet. It is there are almost 100 military and civilian employees who work there, who have a complete overview of German and European airspace, and they are located deep in the bunker of Paulsberg Mountain. And they have a network of 45 air traffic control and Bundeswehr radar installations, as well as data from airbags, early warning aircraft, which all go in there. And they say that like 1,600 to 1,800 aircraft fly simultaneously through the German airspace normally, and there are more than 10,000 flight movements per day. So they have lots of stuff to do, and they are like they are a mixed civilian military authority or agency dealing with air safety. So who would know about UFOs in Germany if not them? Okay. In 2013, remember that the German Bundestag lodged an appeal because they didn't want to release the Bundestag file. In November 2013, the higher administrative court of Berlin-Brandenburg revokes the decision to open the Bundestag files. Frank Reitemeyer, the Berlin citizen, he struggled to lodge an appeal for lack of funding, because he said, now in the third instance, this is going to become very, very expensive. And I helped him put together a crowdfunding campaign, actually, and reported on the whole trial, on the whole thing. You have to add, though, that the German Bundestag has hired a high-class international law firm and has spent tens of thousands of euros on legal expertise and how do you say that? Gutachten. Well, on reports by legal experts of whether or not this should be published. You know, they paid literally tens of thousands of euros to keep this stuff secret, you know. So you can imagine what this was all about. It was not only about UFOs. Now, in the same year, something interesting happened. You know, you ever heard about the Stasi? Stasi? Okay. The Stasi was the intelligence service of East Germany. This is where I grew up, German Democratic Republic. So I am an Ossi, whereas people from the Federal Republic of Germany are all Wessis. There are interesting mentality differences still up to this day. There's this joke about, you know, the Ossis like to refer to Wessis as besser Wessis, which is a word game for better knowing, because many people, because after German reunification in 1990, practically all the companies were closed, national companies were closed, and were sold to some Western company, and then they all had a boss from West Germany who knew it all better, you know. That's why this is where it comes from. Anyway, so in 2013, the Stasi, the Eastern German intelligence service, it became known that they had also some UFO files. For example, there was one case in which 5 people's police officers observed a UFO over Halle, which is in Saxony-Anhalt, from different positions, and that was in 1985. The object is said to have burst after a flight northwards behind a barracks of the Soviet armed forces. And the incident was immediately reported to Erich Mielke, who was then head of the Ministry for State Security, and Markus Wolf, the head of the GDR Foreign Intelligence. The records of the officer on duty, Major Herbert Jeschke, show that the witness descriptions of the object differed from each other. And in addition, experts from the University of Halle, which were concerned with the observation of the sky, were asked for clarification, and they could not provide any information. There was no debris parts whatsoever. There were also newspaper clippings from the then Federal Republic of Germany about light phenomena at the time of the questionable sighting of a Halle. And the Stasi apparently had little interest in UFOs. Instead of interpreting them in the context of possibly extraterrestrial origin, the objects were rather regarded as secret weapons or clever attempts to deceive the class enemy. Nevertheless, the Ministry for State Security was very interested in studies on UFOs and parapsychology from neighboring states of the Warsaw Pact, which was the eastern version of the NATO, NATO alliance. So in one Stasi file, it dealt with topics such as color vision from with the skin, dowsing and telepathy. And an unnamed expert in a file from the early 1970s comes to the conclusion that, I quote, "Scientists of both world systems are currently seriously concerned with the research and release of forces in humans, and that these could not be described as hocus pocus." And that was more or less at the same time when the Stanford Research Institute in the United States conducted research of telepathy and telekinesis with Uri Geller, as you may know. So I found that interesting. So just to remind you, this was the situation of what we now call Germany until 1990. The big black line in the middle is the inner German border between East Germany and West Germany. And what's interesting is that in 2014, it became known that also the Western German intelligence service had UFO files, and not only that, they had actually conducted UFO research. And that was a friend of mine who's also a journalist of a news website called Grenzwissenschaft Aktuell, like Frontier Science Today or something. Andreas Müller, he succeeded in gaining access to a file of the German Federal Intelligence Service, which was actually blocked until 2021. And parts of it are blocked until 2038 or so, or 2063, I think even. I now have the files. I had to sign a whole stack of papers in which I promise I will never release them, and I may quote from it and stuff. But anyway, I have the files, and it's quite interesting what is in there. So from 1982 to 1986, the Bundesnachrichtendienst, the Federal Intelligence Service, collected and analyzed witness reports on unidentified flying objects along the inner German border. And I made a TV report on it for my own TV station, which I'd like to show to you. And you can also see the remnants of the German border. Okay, let's have a look. Der eiserne Vorhang. Ein halbes Jahrhundert lang trennte die innerdeutsche Grenze die Bundesrepublik von der DDR. Mit Stacheldraht, Wachhunden und Splitterminen. Der schwer bewachte Todesstreifen markierte die vorderste Front des Kalten Krieges, trennte NATO-Bündnisstaaten von denen des Warschauer Paktes. Doch nicht nur Militärs behielten die Grenze im Auge, sondern auch der Bundesnachrichtendienst, der Auslandsgeheimdienst der Bundesrepublik. Von 1982 bis 1986 sammelte und analysierte der BND Zeugenberichte über unidentifizierte fliegende Objekte entlang der innerdeutschen Grenze. Das Bundesarchiv in Koblenz. Hier lagern die Unterlagen, deren Existenz deutsche Bundespolitiker bislang verleugnen. Die eigentlich noch bis zum Jahr 2021 gesperrte UFO-Akte konnte nun der Herausgeber des Online-Portals Grenzwissenschaft aktuell einsehen. Sie trägt den Titel DDR-Grenzsperranlagen an der innerdeutschen Grenze, UFO, und sie enthält auf 67 Seiten Sichtungsberichte und Analysen des Bundesnachrichtendienstes.
Die Mehrheit der Akte beinhaltet Fälle, die tatsächlich konventionell erklärbar sind. Flugdrohnen, vornehmlich Ballons, Radarspiegel, die steigen gelassen wurden. Aber es gibt eben, wie so oft, immer die Ausnahmen, die die Regel dann wiederum bestätigen. Und die zeigen eben Fälle, die unidentifiziert bleiben, auch im Sinne der Bearbeiter der Akte.
Einer dieser Fälle trug sich 1986 auf der Ostseeinsel Fehmarn zu. Am frühen Morgen des 26. August beobachten 3 Grenzschutzbeamte aus dem Fenster ihres Dienstraumes ein hell leuchtendes Objekt, das langsam auf den Fährbahnhof Puttgarden zufliegt und dort in einer Höhe von 50 bis 60 Metern in der Luft stehen bleibt. Die Zeugen vernehmen keinerlei Fluggeräusche, nur ein relativ leises Summen. Form, Farbe und Größe können die Grenzschützer aufgrund der strahlenförmig blendenden Beleuchtung des Objektes nicht ausmachen. Die seltsame Sichtung über Fehmarn, nur einer der interessanten UFO-Fälle des Bundesnachrichtendienstes. Für Andreas Müller ist klar, die UFO-Akte des BND ist mehr als nur eine anekdotische Sammlung von Sichtungsberichten, denn sie dokumentiert, auf welche Weise der BND jahrelang und systematisch UFO-Forschung betrieb.
Zum Beispiel, es gibt eine handschriftliche Notiz, die sagt, die dazu auffordert, bitte einen UFO-Vorgang anlegen. Das heißt, diese Prozedere, diese Automatismen gab es. Es gab vor allem dieser Begriff UFO wurde offenbar auch über die Stellen hinweg verwendet. Jeder wusste, was ein UFO-Vorgang ist. Das ist eigentlich eine ganz interessante Erkenntnis aus dieser Akte. Es gab Amtshilfe zwischen den einzelnen Stellen und es geht auch aus Notizen ganz klar hervor, dass die Untersucher dieser Fälle ein herausgehobenes Interesse an weiteren, zum Beispiel Befragungen von Zeugen hatten.
UFOs über der innerdeutschen Grenze. Die seltsamen Flugobjekte wurden also auch hierzulande dokumentiert und analysiert, wie der wissenschaftliche Dienst des Deutschen Bundestages bereits 2009 in einer bis heute zurückgehaltenen Studie mutmaßte. Gerade zu Zeiten des Kalten Krieges, so die Autoren, hätte durchaus ein Interesse daran bestehen können, UFO-Sichtungen nachzugehen, aus Angst vor Spionagedrohnen des ideologischen Gegners. Die nun bekannt gewordenen Akten geben den Wissenschaftlern des Bundestages recht. Doch wahrscheinlich bilden sie nicht mehr als die Spitze des Eisbergs. Die Frage ist nun, was sonst noch in deutschen Archiven auf die Veröffentlichung wartet. Denn in vielen Ländern weltweit stammt der Großteil der veröffentlichten UFO-Akten von Seiten des Militärs. Doch im Gegensatz zu 20 anderen Ländern auf der Welt herrscht bei der deutschen Bundeswehr bislang dazu nur eisiges Schweigen.
Okay, so that was my report. I hope you could read the subtitles. Okay, perfect. So let me just check okay. Let me switch this back a little. Okay. In June 2015, the highest instance court of Germany, the Federal Administrative Court, finally decided that studies undertaken by the Scientific Research Service of the Bundestag are to be released under the German Freedom of Information Act. And so eventually, we helped write legal history in Germany. Because those scientific studies undertaken by the research service are very interesting for journalists. They are the El Dorado for journalists, but they may be Pandora's box for politicians, because the scientific research service often disagrees with the official position of politicians, which is not surprising if you think that if you consider that they base their judgments on science, whereas politicians base their judgments on and their decisions on policy and what the Americans say for the most part in Germany. Okay, so it was released like all the other studies undertaken by the Scientific Research Service, but we still didn't have any clue about what the German military knows or may know about UFOs. And that is why in August of 2015, I made another approach. And I did it in the most public way possible. I asked the speaker of the German government during a press conference directly. And I have to add, though, that the speaker of the German, the current speaker of the German government, he happens to be my former boss when I still worked for mainstream television, for ZDF, which is Germany's largest, or one of the two largest TV public broadcast services, comparable to the BBC in Germany. So I asked him, and this was the result.
Robert Fleischer vom Exo-Magazin TV. Ich habe eine etwas ungewöhnliche, aber durchaus ernst gemeinte Frage. In 20 Ländern hat das Militär bereits unidentifizierte Flugobjekte registriert, jahrzehntelang Akten dazu angelegt und sie nach jahrzehntelanger Geheimhaltung auch freigegeben. In 5 Ländern gibt es sogar staatliche UFO-Untersuchungsbehörden. Meine Frage an Herrn Seibert: Warum kümmert sich in Deutschland eigentlich niemand darum? Und an den Sprecher des Verteidigungsministeriums: Was müsste passieren, damit Frau von der Leyen die Einstufung von möglicherweise doch existenten geheimen UFO-Akten neu überdenkt?
Wir danken für die interessante Frage. Wir sind gespannt auf die Antwort.
Ich kann nicht behaupten, dass ich in irgendeiner Weise ein Experte auf diesem Gebiet wäre. Ich weiß, dass es eine Reihe von Menschen gibt, die damit sehr viel Zeit verbringen und im Internet sich dazu austauschen. Es steht nicht im Mittelpunkt der Politik dieser Bundesregierung, es steht nicht mal an den Rändern der Politik dieser Bundesregierung. Wir haben auch nicht das Gefühl, dass es in irgendeiner Weise eine Frage ist, die für das gute Zusammenleben in Deutschland oder in der Welt von Bedeutung wäre.
Vielleicht könnte man hier die Phrase benutzen: Die Frage stellt sich nicht. Aber
Wollte ich jetzt mal nicht.
Vielleicht das Verteidigungsministerium noch?
Also, ich möchte denen eigentlich nichts mehr hinzufügen. Aber mir sind weder die Vorgänge noch irgendwelche Akten, die spezifisch bekannt, und sehen Sie es mir bitte nach, dass ich in diesem Rahmen jetzt hier weder was sagen kann, wirklich nichts sagen kann dazu. Also das ist eine Sache, die uns in unserer Verantwortung nicht umtreibt, wirklich nicht.
Okay, so this is what you get from the German government when you ask an informed question. You get laughter. But I have to add, though, that those people at the press conference, those were not, for the most part, those were not journalists, but members of the public who were all allowed into the federal press conference once a year, and they have the chance to ask questions. And that was the only way how we were able to smuggle ourselves into that conference. In 2016, as you know, there was the United States elections, presidential elections, and Hillary Clinton started talking about UFOs on television on the Jimmy Kimmel show. And so I thought, why not try this in Germany too? Because we had federal elections in 2017. Here you can see the interior of the German Bundestag, and please note, it looks like a giant UFO. And I decided to send out letters to candidates of every political party before the German federal elections in 2017. And I asked them the following question: Will you, after being elected to the Bundestag, make sure that German authorities and ministries make their UFO files public? And I received answers. I sent this question to all kinds of political parties. Those are the political parties that I sent the letters to. You can see them here on the spectrum from the left to the right, the Left Party, the Green Party, the Social Democratic Party, the Christian Democratic Party, the Free Liberal Party, and there's also a more right-wing party called Alternative for Germany. Those are the political parties that I sent the letters to. And I received interesting statements from coalition government members, all right? So on the left-hand side, you see Clemens Binninger from the Christian Democratic Party. He says, I have no knowledge of UFO sightings or of files on UFO sightings. In this context, I refer to your conversation with government spokesman Steffen Seibert and the spokesman of the Federal Ministry of Defense in September 2015 at the Federal Press Conference. The two spokespersons also had no knowledge of any such events. Thomas Oppermann, who is from the competing party, Social Democrats, he said, I can only underline what my colleague Clemens Binninger has already replied to you. I too have no knowledge on UFO sightings. And the man on the right-hand side, who's also from the Social Democratic Party, says, I can only underline what my colleague Thomas Oppermann has already told you. So you see, they refer to each other. The Green Party, they said, they made a promising statement at the first side. They said the secret documents on unidentified flying objects must be made public. And then they go on to state, unfortunately, however, these are only available in Klingon and partly blacked out. If you are familiar with this language or know someone who is, please contact the Federal Intelligence Agency. Okay, so this is the former president of the European Parliament from 2012 to 2017. He was the SPD, the Social Democratic candidate for the German chancellorship, and he was Merkel's main opponent in the federal elections of 2017. And I had the chance to ask him personally whether he would open UFO files. And that was interesting because this was also in the same room that we just saw, the Federal Press Conference building, but this was a press conference organized by German mainstream media. Certain editorial houses cooperated to organize this, and they invited their readers of the newspapers to send in questions they would like to ask the politicians, and they had an online list where you can vote up or down the questions you like, and the questions with the most votes would eventually be invited to that press conference, and the people were then able to ask the question. And I asked the UFO question, and it was voted on top of the list immediately. Like, it was amazing. It was so amazing that I even think that some hacker may have interfered there, because it was just amazing how many people wanted to know this question. So my question ranked on top of the list for weeks until they eventually were obliged to invite me. And so this is the answer from the then candidate for German chancellorship in 2017 and former president of the European Parliament. Have a look.
Eine weitere Frage, die, muss ich persönlich sagen, zu meiner Überraschung relativ weit vorne gelandet ist in der Online-Abstimmung, stellt ein Leser der Leipziger Volkszeitung, Herr Robert Fleischer.
Guten Tag, Herr Schulz, schön, dass Sie da sind. Mir geht es um die Informationsfreiheit in Deutschland, und ich meine meine Frage wirklich total ernst. Also in 21 Ländern auf der Welt sind vormals geheim gehaltene UFO-Akten veröffentlicht worden, unter anderem in Frankreich, Großbritannien, Italien und Spanien. Und die komplette Liste hätte ich hier, also falls Sie das interessiert, gebe ich Ihnen das gerne. Sollte man das nicht auch in Deutschland machen, und würden Sie sich als Bundeskanzler dafür einsetzen? Und meine Frage ist nicht, ob Sie was über UFO-Akten wissen in Deutschland, sondern ob Sie sich dafür einsetzen würden, dass geheime UFO-Akten öffentlich werden.
Ich muss bekennen, ich habe mich mit dem Thema noch nicht befasst.
In Frankreich werden die von einer staatlichen UFO-Forschungsbehörde erforscht.
Ja.
Die UFOs.
versuche, nee, Moment mal, ich versuche Ihnen, ich hoffe, rechtlich einwandfreie Antwort zu geben. Wenn diese Akten nicht veröffentlicht werden, weil sie einer bestimmten Klassifizierung unterworfen werden, als geheim, dann kann ich Ihnen jetzt nicht versprechen, ohne entsprechende gesetzliche Rahmenbedingungen sie zu veröffentlichen. Denn ein Bundeskanzler der Bundesrepublik ist an die gesetzlichen Vorgaben gebunden. Ich kann Ihnen aber zusagen, ich würde prüfen, was sind die Voraussetzungen, warum sind sie als geheim klassifiziert. Und wenn es keiner weiteren Geheimhaltung in diesem Bereich bedarf, dann würde ich dem Deutschen Bundestag vorschlagen, sie zu veröffentlichen.
Vielen Dank.
It was a great statement, wasn't it? Unfortunately, he didn't become the chancellor. Anyway, okay. Let me switch back to normal here. Okay. Okay, so I'd also asked the Chancellor Angela Merkel about this, and she would never reply. But then shortly after her main opponent, Martin Schulz, had made that UFO statement, I suddenly received an email from the German Chancellery, and they said the Space Operations Center of the German German military is tasked with monitoring all near-Earth objects. Since its beginnings, there has not been any data collection related to unknown flying objects. Therefore, there is no material to be published. And I insisted, and I asked about the national, I replied to that email, I insisted, I asked about the national situation in command room for airspace security and all the things that I had learned about it. And this was her answer. There are no documents on the subject you have requested from the National Situation and Command Centers for Air Safety. Please understand that there will be no further correspondence with you on the same subject in the future. So this is how it works in Germany. That was an interesting answer, and I had almost given up asking the German government about this, when suddenly on December 16, 2017, as you all know, there was this very interesting development that we are still facing today in the United States, when the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Political and many, many other mainstream media outlets in the United States started reporting on the existence of a formerly secret UFO research project, which cost $22 million over 5 years, which is called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. It was, of course, almost impossible to find within the budget of 700 billion US dollars of defense budget, but that was actually intended. So the New York Times said that this program existed. Luis Elizondo, the head of the project, he's a member of the military intelligence of the Defense Intelligence Agency. He ran that project. He went public. They made public so many things at that time, and also even on May 28, 2019, the Washington Post had this article: UFOs exist, and everyone needs to adjust to that fact. Now, keep in mind that the Washington Post and the New York Times for decades have done nothing on the UFO subject but to make it ridiculous, but to ridicule it, you know? So this was like a complete U-turn in US mainstream media reporting, which could not have been ignored by the German government, I thought. You know, and they were bringing in real defense issues, you know, issues for air safety, issues of national security and all of that, you know. Suddenly this subject had become a very, very serious subject. And so I thought, okay, let's give it another try. Okay, let's give it another try. I'll return for the third time to the building of the Federal Press Conference And this time I will bring my colleague with me, who is Dirk Pohlmann. His name is Dirk Pohlmann, and he is he's a very reputed former mainstream TV journalist. He has done dozens of TV documentaries. He won prizes and all of that. He's worked for public broadcast companies in Germany. He's a very very serious journalist, and I asked him to ask the UFO question, and we wanted to know how the German government reacts to those publications in the United States. So this is the answer. Just a second.
Ja. Das ist eine Frage an Herrn Seibert und Herrn von Plüskow. Und zwar, Sie werden ja mitbekommen haben, dass das amerikanische Verteidigungsministerium offiziell UFO-Forschung betreibt jetzt. Die amerikanischen Medien, also die allen Großen, haben sich dazu geäußert. Die Washington Post hat geschrieben, UFOs sind eine Realität und jeder muss sich daran anpassen. Wir sind auf einem anderen Kontinent, aber auch hier in Europa haben England, Frankreich, Italien und Spanien staatliche Forschungsstellen dazu. In Deutschland gibt es offiziell nicht einmal Akten dazu. 2015 ist diese Frage schon mal gestellt worden und es gab mit Erheiterung die Antwort, dass sich in Deutschland niemand damit beschäftigt. Gilt diese Antwort immer noch, dass sich 2015 damit niemand beschäftigt hat? Und ist es 2019 auch so, trotz der Verteidigungsministerien in den anderen Ländern?
Also ich kann Ihnen dazu sagen, soweit ich weiß, beschäftigen wir uns mit dem Thema der UFO-Forschung im Verteidigungsministerium nicht. Ich sehe da jetzt auch keinen so großen Zusammenhang, außer Sie...
Akten, ja? Also Sie haben auch keine Akten dazu?
Ich kenne nicht alle Akten des Ministeriums, das kann ich nicht beantworten. Herr Seibert, kennen Sie Akten?
Ich benutze jetzt mal den hier gerne gebrauchten Satz, ich habe dem nichts hinzuzufügen, weil ich wirklich nichts hinzuzufügen habe und würde sehr gerne den Artikel der Washington Post sehen, in dem sie UFOs als eine Realität bezeichnet. Die Washington Post, na, da würde ich mich wundern. Aber
die amerikanische Marine hat offiziell jetzt sozusagen Verfahren dazu eingeführt. Gibt es in der deutschen Luftwaffe und der deutschen Marine keine Sichtungen? Es hat sie auch noch nie gegeben. Also dabei bleiben Sie.
Also mir ist nicht bekannt, dass die Marine und die Luftwaffe jeweils UFOs gesehen hat. Tut mir leid.
Und wenn, dann müsste es sich um eine Zufallssichtung handeln.
Möglich, ja.
Das Auswärtige Amt möchte noch ergänzen. Vielleicht ganz kurz ja doch noch ergänzen für alle, die dieses Thema interessant finden. Es gibt beispielsweise im Auswärtigen Amt ein Referat für Weltraumrecht, was sich aber nicht für Beziehungen zu außerirdischen Zivilisationen zuständig ist, sondern da geht es unter anderem zum Beispiel um weltraumhaftungsrechtliche Fragen. Also wenn ein Satellit einen anderen beschädigt, wer ist wem haftungsrechtlich verpflichtet. Es geht auch um die Frage, wie kann man sicherstellen, dass der Weltraum friedlich genutzt wird und es da nicht zu einer Militarisierung kommt. Das ist eines der Themen, über die wir auch in rüstungskontrollpolitischen Gremien der Vereinten Nationen sprechen. Also es ist nicht so, dass uns das Thema des Weltraums nicht interessiert, aber nicht meines Wissens unter dem Aspekt, den Sie angesprochen haben.
Jetzt könnten wir noch das Verkehrsministerium fragen.
Meine Frage ging dezidiert an Herrn von Plüskow, weil in den USA wird das wegen Fasszusammenstößen als Sicherheitsfrage auch im Luftverkehr betrachtet und auch als militärische
in der Tat wieder das Verkehrsministerium zuständig. Ja. Gut, ich glaube, sind wir durch mit dem Thema.
Yeah, let me just switch back to normal. Okay, so you see this is the same ridiculous kind of statement that they made 4 years earlier. And what's interesting is the answer of the spokesperson of the Ministry of Defense, who knows, I don't know all the files of the Ministry of Defense, I cannot give you an answer. Well, he could answer that. He could give that answer to any kind of question that is asked to him in that federal press conference, couldn't he? Okay. So is there really nothing in the German military? Do they know nothing about UFOs? Is that true? In a couple of years ago, I met a retired general from the German military. He worked in high government ranks for 14 years, including the Ministry of Defense and shaped NATO headquarters in Brussels. He was in the audience during one of my lectures. And after my lecture was over, he came to me and he said, "That was very interesting what you said, but there is something I want to tell you to add to the picture. Oh, and by the way, I had my own UFO encounter." And I said, "Oh, wow, that's interesting. Tell me about this, you know." Okay, so on December 5th, 1982, he was on a rescue mission to save an old man who had suffered a cardiac arrest. He's actually a medical general, a medic in the rank of a general of the Bundeswehr. Okay. But at that time, he wasn't a general. So in 1982, he was, I think, I don't know what the English name is for that, but it was not general anyway. So on December 5th, 1982, he was called on a rescue mission to save that old man who had suffered a cardiac arrest. And since there were no medical emergency helicopters available in the region, the military was called to assist with their search and rescue helicopter. It took him quite some time to resuscitate that old man, and they flew with him to a hospital in Celle. And when they arrived there, he had another cardiac arrest. The medic started running down the hallway. A nurse saw the former general, who was still exhausted from having resuscitated that man, and offered him and the helicopter crew coffee before they were to return to their base in Fassberg in Lower Saxony. Between midnight and 1 a.m., on December 6th, they jumped into the helicopter again. The weather that night was very bad, low clouds, drizzling rain. Their helicopter was flying at a low altitude, around 50 meters above surface and around 20 meters above the treetops. And here you can see where this red dot is. This is where he was stationed. Okay. This was in Lower Saxony. This was his military base. Okay, so when they arrived in this area near the small town Eschede, they suddenly noticed some glowing lights on the left-hand side. He said, "We wondered why is it glowing in the clouds?" Let me show you. This is where this okay. So what you see here is the path they flew from with their helicopter between Celle in the south and Fassberg in the north, and there was somewhere in the middle, somewhere over here. Okay, this is where it happened, over a wood area. Okay, and they suddenly saw this glowing lights on the left hand side, and they wondered, why is it glowing in the clouds? It was a very bright light, comparable to that of a spotlight, but it had a different quality. He described it as a very bright green-white light, which didn't hurt the eye, that was continuously flowing, he said, like water from a spring. It flew alongside them. The distance was difficult to ascertain. He estimated at around 100 meters of distance. They were flying at about 160 kilometers an hour. The pilot said to the onboard mechanic, "Who is flying there at this weather?" They were wondering if this was some secret aircraft. They decided to call the tower of the nearby airfield Langenhagen to check whether they had traffic, but the controller answered they only had their helicopter on the screen and nothing else. The strange light accompanied the helicopter for about 1 to 2 minutes, and then suddenly made a sharp right angle turn towards them. They were all shocked. The pilot tore the helicopter sharply down right, and when the light had approached the helicopter at about 10 meters, the general heard a static radio noise on his headset. The onboard mechanic screamed, "Watch out, you're going to get into the trees." Then the object changed its direction very rapidly and shot upwards in the air, where it disappeared in another glowing cloud. Fortunately, the helicopter came to rest above a small lake in the forest, where the pilot managed to stabilize the aircraft. They kept hovering there for a couple of minutes to see if the light would return, to sort of digest what had just happened. And they also contacted Airfield Langenhagen again to verify if there was really no other traffic in the area. But the controller insisted they were alone, and he added, "But we just saw you fly a strange maneuver." After a while, they continued their flight back to Fassberg, and the weather was so bad they had to open the door for landing. The light, he said, had demonstrated such an incredible maneuverability, way beyond anything he had seen before. Mass inertia law didn't seem to apply to it, which is why he is not sure if it was a solid object at all. There were no physical interferences with the helicopter, like instruments going offline or anything, besides of the static on the radio. After the landing, the 4 crewmen talked about the incident and decided they would not report it for fear of losing their good reputations and flight licenses. He kept this incident for himself for many decades, until around 2012 he read the French Cometa report, which you may know about, the official government study undertaken by the French. And there in there he found sighting reports from several pilots who had seen similar light balls, and that was the reason for him to go public with his own sighting, but anonymously. And I said, wow, that's interesting. So there are UFO cases with military involvement in Germany, but how come there is no official interest in the subject? And he goes, Robert, you need to understand that Germany had been an occupied country for decades. And let me bring up this map again. You can see the US occupation zone down in the south. That's in the southern west part of Germany. That's Bavaria and Hessen. And you see the French zone here in the west on the French border. And the British occupied the northern part of West Germany. And after World War II, Germany was not a sovereign state until the year 1990. And he said, it may very well be the case that German authorities are the exception to the rule and that they are not dealing with UFOs, because the air supremacy was divided among the Allied powers. The general says that this has led German authorities to become sort of resignated and afraid to take responsibility over their own matters. Over the years, he says, this has become sort of institutionalized. Whenever there was something bizarre, the Germans were happy to leave it to the Allied powers, mainly the United States, United Kingdom, and France. And it may very well be the case that this is true, as the following UFO case suggests. And this is another case which happened on August 13, 1976. This is where the red dot is. This is also in Lower Saxony, in the north of Germany, between Diepholz and Petershagen. It was at 5 p.m. Okay, so there was a UFO encounter. The pilot of a Piper Arrow PA-20A aircraft was flying at 3,500 feet when he noticed a strange light approaching from the northeast at his 9 o'clock. After 3 to 5 minutes, the object came closer and took a fixed position off the Piper's left wing. The object was oval-shaped and very bright yellow in its center with an indistinct flame orange boundary. Its diameter subtended about 3.5 degrees of arc, and suddenly the Piper went into 2 rapid 360-degree clockwise rolls from which the pilot had to recover manually. He discovered that he had dropped about 500 feet during the roll and recovery maneuver. When he next checked his instrument panel, he discovered that his magnetic compass was spinning in clockwise direction so fast that he couldn't read the number in its square window. Looking outside again, he saw that the UFO was still behind him, suggesting that he too had lost the same amount of altitude, that it too had lost the same amount of altitude. The pilot climbed back to his cruise altitude and called on the radio to flight control at Hanover Airport to the east of his position. The air traffic controller told him that the radar showed both his airplane and another object nearby. The controller said that an aircraft would be sent to investigate. Little more than 4 minutes later, two US Air Force F-4 Phantom jets arrived on either side of him, traveling between 400 and 500 miles per hour. The jet on the right side was slightly lower, closer, and ahead of the jet on the left. The pilot was certain that they were American planes. Just as the jet arrived, the UFO accelerated forward and then upward at about a 30-degree angle above the horizontal and turned right, passing in front of his aircraft. It quickly outdistanced its pursuers and was out of sight in a matter of seconds. The compass eventually returned to normal operation after the UFO had departed. Now, what's interesting is that after he had landed, within minutes of his landing, a military van without license plates pulled up to his plane, and 5 men in business suits got out. They would not identify who they worked for. He was taken to an underground room on the airport property where a man sat behind a desk. 2 of the original men left the room. The others began asking him detailed questions about the sighting. He had the impression, however, that one of the men was an American. This questioning went on for about 3 hours. He had to repeat the entire event many times, as well as answer technical details. At one point, he was politely asked to read and sign a form printed in German, which stated that he agreed never to disclose the details of his UFO sighting. The pilot bravely declined to sign the form, despite the fact that it was firmly suggested that his pilot's license might be suspended if he did not comply. After this, they finally let him go. Later on, it was discovered that parts of the aircraft's landing gear and engine crankshaft were strongly and permanently magnetized. They had to be replaced at another date. So that might be the reason why Germany officially refuses to have any interest in the subject. Remember, Germany hosts the biggest US military base outside the United States, Ramstein. And now, just recently, the United States have announced that they will withdraw 11,900 troops from Germany, but not from the important military bases like Ramstein, okay? This may actually be the case, you know, that in fact the Germans really do not deal with UFOs because they've always been handing it over to the Americans, and the Americans are those who deal with the subject in Germany. However, there is still ongoing interest, and I'm coming to the end here. In 2018, there was a parliamentary question to the government from a member of the Bundestag of the Green Party, and he wanted to know what precautions, protocols, or plans for a possible first contact with extraterrestrial life exist on the part of the federal government, and in which cases was the possibility of such contact the subject of a bi- or multilateral discussion with other states. And the official answer of the German government was, there are no protocols or plans with a possible first contact with extraterrestrial life, as the government considers a first contact on the territory of Germany to be extremely unlikely according to the current state of scientific knowledge. Concrete cases that would have been the subject of bilateral or multilateral talks with other states are not known. So the first contact, according to the German government in 2008, out of the question. 10 years later, extremely unlikely. You see, things are moving very slowly in Germany. However, there is another promising development on the academic edge of German reality. Here you can see Dr. Andreas Anton. He is one of 2 sociologists who in January 2019 published an academic book called The Society of the Extraterrestrials, Introduction into Exosociology. He and his, the other author, Dr. Michael Schetsche, they work at the Institute for Frontier Areas of Psychology and Mental Health in Freiburg, which is a very reputed institute, but it is a private institute. It does not formally belong to, officially belong to any university, but what they're doing is very respected academic work, okay? And in this book, they approach questions like, are humans alone in the universe? Is there any chance of encountering alien intelligences? And what would contact with aliens mean for the future of mankind? And in this book, their main arguments are that according to recent findings in astronomy and astrophysics, it seems more likely than ever before that mankind is not alone in the universe. Second, that traditional SETI research has operated with questionable assumptions that unnecessarily restrict the search for extraterrestrial intelligences, and real ETs could be completely different than all our previous ideas about them suggest. And third, the contact with an alien intelligence could take place in very different ways. We could receive an alien radio signal, find an alien artifact on Earth or in our solar system, and make direct contact with extraterrestrial entities. They say the first contact could have dramatic consequences for humanity as a whole. In addition to scientific and ideological ramifications, global political, economic, and religious disturbances can also be expected. And one reason why these consequences could be very drastic is because humanity is not prepared in any way for contact with an ET civilization. Changing this is one of the main tasks of exosociology. And please visit the web link if you're interested in this work, because there's also a resume of their book, exosociology.net, with IE at the end. There's an English PDF about the book. So you see, their first contact scenarios are the signal scenario, where signals from outer space are intercepted that are of artificial origin. The artifact scenario, where material remains of aliens are found on Earth or in our solar system. And the encounter scenario, an ET spacecraft is detected in near-Earth space, which due to its flight maneuvers or other actions can be assumed to be controlled by a biological or artificial intelligence. And on the basis of these three scenarios, the sociologists draw conclusions about what repercussions could be expected for mankind. However, as you will note, the UFO scenario is not included here. So those scenarios, they all play in the future. They say we cannot include the UFO subject into our exosociology research because the scientific methodology would be completely different from what we are doing in sociology, because then they have to deal with the veracity of witness testimony, physics, biology, detective work, basically. So the key questions, who are the visitors, why they are here, and what are their motives, remain a prognostic void in the exosociology. But I think the UFO phenomenon is the most promising lead we have towards discovering intelligence, extraterrestrial intelligence, and what they may do here. And our reaction to that first contact, I think, depends more heavily on what are the motivations and where do they come from, rather than on how, in which form do we discover that we are not alone. So this subject is, in my opinion, the most important subject for mankind, that mankind will have to approach at any given time. It may happen tomorrow, it may happen in 10 years or 20 years or in 50 years, but mankind is in an historic episode of its existence. We are about to enter space. We are about to cross the border of our horizon forever. And we are going to colonize parts of our solar system and eventually probably parts of the universe. And so I think it is highly time for us to start thinking about the possibility, the very likely possibility, that we are not alone in the universe. And I think it would be very good for mankind to prepare for this event, because we only have to look into our own history to see what happens when a highly evolved civilization encounters less evolved civilization. Think about the discovery of South America. Okay, so that's it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Robert. That's great. I've certainly got some questions, but to people who have some questions or comments, I can't see it from my side because I'm the host, but down the bottom there, I think it's under more or somewhere on the bottom of your screen, you can raise hand. So if you want to click on that, if you want to ask a question or make a comment, please do. Or I'm just going to put I won't do that. But is there anyone who has a question for Robert or a comment or something like that? You have to unmute yourselves as well. So,
hallo.
Go in.
Ich habe eine Frage zu Billy Meyer. Was macht
I don't know what Billy Meyer is currently doing. I know that this is a very disputed case. I have never personally investigated his claims, but I have to tell you, from what I know, I wouldn't lend much credence to it. His ex-wife, I think, she came clean after she got separated from him. She showed photos of the models that he had manufactured himself and thrown in the air. It's nothing that I would be very interested in. Billy Meyer case. So no, I don't think that this is a reliable witness or anything that is worth investigating.
Okay, danke.
Yeah, bitte.
I was just going to say that I think that it sounds, from the way that anything that's raised about the UFO, as we saw tonight, is ridiculed by the German authorities. And it reminds me of other things where people have something to hide, no matter what the topic, nothing to do with UFOs necessarily. So I just smell a rat.
Yeah, well, what can I say? You know, there are those rumors about Nazi flying saucers, and I have never really investigated this because I don't know of any serious UFO researcher who takes this seriously. There's lots of rumors about Nazi flying saucers in the United States. There are books by people who aren't even German, who don't understand the documents, and the few documents we have do not prove anything. It's a difficult question, I have to tell you. I think the Germans may very well know more than they publicly admit, and they may have very good reasons to keep it secret. I mean, besides of the general political reasons to keep it secret, because once the aliens are here, if they are aliens, you know, I personally don't think they're aliens like visitors from another planet, but let's assume they're more or less like us, you know. I think people would become less interested in what our politicians say and become more interested in what the extraterrestrials say about what is your highest tax rate. Do you have sex before marriage? Do you have to wear a veil? You know, or is there religion at all? Is there money at all? Why do you go to war? You know, how do you deal with COVID-19? I mean, there's so many interesting questions that you would rather like to have answered by a more evolved species than from people who sit in the chancellery of Germany, you know, or in any other human parliament. So those are the general reasons to keep it secret. But maybe the Germans, I mean, you know, I'm kind of 50-50, you know. It may be that the Germans have always given this to the Americans, but I just can't imagine that the German let's say, the German Military Defense Agency or the German Foreign Intelligence Agency are not taking note of what is going on in the United States, and that they are not having an opinion about this and not having their own conclusions. I just can't imagine that. You know, I mean, those are the spokespersons of the German government. Of course, if there are state secrets, the last person the government would tell those secrets to is the spokesperson of the government, right? So it's no wonder they don't know anything. But I just can't imagine that the Germans really don't know anything. I'm sorry. There are so many. I left out a whole large portion of my inquiries, official inquiries to the government and to all kinds of military branches, and I can tell you they are highly contradictory. You know, when you ask as a journalist and you ask the press officer of the military, they will, as a journalist, they will say, oh yeah, in terms of unexplained sightings, we work together with a certain university in Germany. Whereas when you file an FOIA request and say, okay, how are you dealing with those sightings, they say, we have no procedures or anything whatsoever. You know, you see, they're just contradicting themselves, but still you're running against the wall, you're hitting the wall, and I think sooner or later we may find out more, but this may take a while. Yeah.
Robert, there's a question that's come up in the chat. What is your view of the suggested link between COVID-19 and extraterrestrials?
I don't see any connection there. The only thing I think which may be interesting is I belong to those people who put in question certain measures imposed upon us by the German government because the COVID-19 crisis in Germany is actually non-existent. There are like 6,000 people tested positive, which doesn't necessarily mean they are infected. But still, you have all those measures. You have to wear a mask in shops, and you have to keep a distance of 1.50 meters between one another, and many other things. And I think the main concern for me is actually the age of surveillance capitalism. You know, that they will use this. That this is a new invisible enemy that mankind has to fight against, and that which will be used, which will be instrumentalized to put through to engage in certain measures like selling medical data to private companies so they can make up profiles and stuff, you know, which will make them, which will give them the opportunity to gain lots of money. And other things. I mean, I could talk about this for ages, but I mean, if you think about it, why is the United States government obviously engaged in telling the public about UFOs now? Because you can't tell me that what is happening there doesn't have any involvement of the government. If you look at the Stars Academy, this is if you just have to say that this is a targeted information campaign involving former and active intelligence officers with coordinated press campaigns with influence on US politicians. You had those briefings, and with influence on US legislation, as we just learned about the US Intelligence Authorization Act in 2000 for the fiscal year 2021, where Christopher Mellon wrote the whole thing about unidentified aerial phenomena. You know, so if you think about it, you know, at first it was the Russians, the communists, that was the invisible enemy that mankind, that we had to fight against. Then it was war on terror after World War II, after September 11, you know. War on terror justified just about any means to gain even more control about our private lives. Now you have COVID-19, which justifies about any means that you can imagine. You have completely undemocratic measures put in practice by the German government and in many other countries as well. And you wonder, why would the United States do this? Well, geopoliticians, people interested in geopolitics and geostrategy, know that the United States are about to lose their position as the predominant world leader. It's not going to take long, maybe 10 or 20 years, but the economic focus is already directed towards your directions, towards China, Asia. This is where the main power in the world will be located in the future. And so, if you know that you are a fainting world power about to lose its predominance, then you may come up with yet another invisible enemy that mankind has to unite against, possibly under the leadership of the United States, which may be the extraterrestrials, war on aliens. This is just my thoughts about this. Of course, it's just a conspiracy theory for the moment, but we will see. I mean, what I noticed is that whatever comes out of to the Stars Academy and the Unidentified History series is that it's a threat. It's a threat. You have the Senator Marco Rubio, who says, well, if there are things flying around our military bases which we don't know nothing about and which have extraordinary flight maneuverability, then I consider this a threat to the national security. You have this included in the Intelligence Authorization Act. And I also spoke to Luis Elizondo personally, and and of course, threat. So I hope I will be wrong about this assumption, but let's see how it all turns out.
Deb, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, funny you notice you must have picked up my energy. Hello, Robert.
Hello, Deborah.
You gave an amazing presentation.
Thank you.
I just love the depth and the rigor. You obviously are someone who really does stay on board with what's evidence out there, and you can speculate from there, but I really appreciate that. The whole field for me is so swamped by every man and his dog coming out and being an authority on all this, and there seems to be a lot of controlled narratives going on through the Academy to the Stars. I feel that it's I keep thinking of Carol Rosan's comments about what
last card,
about the whole sort of the next one will be the alien invasion scenario that will be played out to us. What I'm asking you about, how do you cut through that muddy territory that is right through the system? I mean, people like Corey Good coming out and Salah for me has become an embarrassment. But I just feel like some of these people, I don't know whether they are who they're working for, whether they're coming from their own place of ego. I don't know. Excuse my convoluted questioning, but what commentary do you have on that, and how do you cut through it?
There is a UFO industry in the United States of America. I usually refer to it jokingly as a UFO circus, and you will be invited to the arena when you have an interesting story to tell. And there are so many speakers in the United States who make their living from traveling to one conference to the other. And of course, they are not going to be invited if they'll tell you the same old shit again, so they have to come up with something new in order to remain an interest in a speaker that they would be interested to invite to that conference. And I decided for myself not to participate in this. large parts of what I just told you is a presentation I held back in 2018 in Great Britain, and I added the new developments in Germany, and that is because it's not that I have nothing to tell, but in terms of what happens in Germany, there is just not so many things going on, so many reliable things, and I'm not interested in making money in the first place. I make my living from Exo Magazine TV, and I interview respected experts on this, many people with doctors or professors. For example, today we're going to publish an interview I did with Dr. Walter von Lucadou, who is Germany's foremost expert on parapsychology and a very, very respected researcher in academia. I just do my journalistic work, and I'm not sensationalizing anything. I'm not so much concerned with individual UFO sightings from private people, because, of course, it may be interesting what my aunt Margaret may have seen from her balcony and the fuzzy photo that she took with her smartphone, but that doesn't compare in any way to the quality of an in-depth military investigation about a certain UFO sighting that took place near a military facility or something, and where there are documents and trained observers, and so I just try to do my journalistic work. And in terms of Corey Good, he said that I don't deal with him. I once said that he refers to himself as the ambassador of the purple avians or something, who is here on Earth to spread the message of hope and healthy nutrition and all of that, which is very, very important. And I said, I think it's about time to reveal my true identity as the ambassador of the blue avians, who is here to declare war on the purple avians. What else can you say about this? It's just ridiculous.
I know Corey Good. I know Corey Good from nearly 10 years ago. It's been fascinating to watch him develop this whole scenario. Anyway, I won't go into that. The work you're doing is important, and I think that people like yourself and Richard Dolan, who's also trying to stay on track with all this and do real research, and there's others out there too, clearly. I feel that there's a bit of siloing going on. That's actually, I think there needs to be more of a united global front on this. I feel that I just think of the Elizondo and the guy from Blink 192. They're kept to themselves. And there are some really good people out there, and they're not letting them through the door to actually say, let's all work together. And I question, what is your agenda? So I'd be interested to know, do you think Elizondo and the Academy to the Stars has got our best interests?
That's a good question. When I met Luis Elizondo in 2018 in Rome, in Italy, I was there at a private, at a, let's say, internal meeting with Italian UFO researchers, members of the Italian military and intelligence agencies. And he said, our goal is to report, to collect the data, analyze the data, and report to leadership. And then the next day during the conference, he said, our goal is to collect the data, to analyze the data, and to inform the public. So I asked him, what do you mean with report to leadership? I think, what is it for leadership? Is it for you reporting back to the government, or is it for the public? He said, well, it can be both ways. And if you listen to what they recently said, they said, well, of course, we want to work with the government. We already have contracts with the government. We are going to have some classified contracts with the government. And my personal concern is that they are now stealing the show. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but if you think about that, this is an organization that has inside knowledge, exclusive inside knowledge. On the one hand, on the other hand, this is a club of intelligence officers and people from the military-industrial complex. So there is some reason for concern there, that they will tell us the truth. And my concern is that they are stealing the show. And that traditional UFO research organizations like MUFON are completely left aside. And I mean, you must have followed what happened to the head of Jen Harzen arrest and stuff. You know, so I would wish that MUFON in America would assume that role again and try to return to a scientific and more sober approach than they did in the past couple of years, where it was all about show and making money, you know. Because I think we need that counterweight in the times that to come, you know. We need professional and serious, sober scientists dealing with UFO sightings. Because we cannot possibly leave all this to Luis Elizondo and his film crew, you know. I mean, it's interesting what they're coming out with, all the new military witnesses, you know, that's interesting. But I'd just like to have some other people also who deal with this and not leave the last conclusion about what this is all about to them. Because already their main conclusion that they seem to be drawing in every episode of Unidentified, you can see that they consider this a threat to national security, and it's a threat to national security, and it's a threat to national security. And if you think about that, this phenomenon, whatever it is, wherever they come from, it seems to have been here for a very long time, forever, possibly. You know, my friend Eric von Däniken, he wrote many, many books on the subject, Ancient Aliens and all of that, you know. And I think if they were hostile, all they would have needed to do was push a button on board their spacecraft and turn our planet into dust, you know, with one mouse click or something. So the fact that they haven't done that yet, to me, suggests that they are not hostile and therefore not a threat in the first place. As I've told you, I'm also very interested in all the other subjects surrounding the UFO phenomenon. I'm not necessarily the mere nuts and bolts guy. You know, I think that consciousness plays a huge role in this. I just don't know whether it's possible to willingly make contact with extraterrestrials with the CE5 protocol. I don't know. I've never personally tried that. Why not? You know, what I do think though is that, you know, there are many people who do channeling and stuff. And I talked to a couple of researchers and scientists about this, and I also happened to talk to the late Germany's foremost expert on instrumental transcommunication, which is electronic voice phenomena, more or less. And what I learned from this is that, of course, you are in touch with some entity which may materialize itself on magnetic tape or on audio or video even. But then the question is, who are you dealing with, you know? Because they can tell you whatever they want. Why would you believe what they are telling you? And there are many examples of where there were entities that they contacted which gave them terrible messages. You're going to die, or, you know. So it's it's an obscure, I think I think you really have to be careful who you're dealing with, who you want to get in touch with. And I don't know, I mean, okay, at CE5, they don't deal with electronic voice phenomena. As far as I know, they deal with sightings of lights in the sky. So the danger that there's something evil coming through may not be as big as in electronic voice phenomena thing. But still, you know, I would be very careful. And I also have my doubts that the beings that are observed in our skies, tracked on military radar and stuff, that they're actually eager to get to know us, that they're actually interested in contacting us, because from at least from the military cases that I have studied, you cannot see that they would be willing to engage in a direct conversation or anything. There are cases, but for the most part, I would say they are observers, and sometimes they do a show of force, but nothing more. So, and that's why I say I think what we have to consider is the possibility that they may be so much more advanced than we are in their evolution, that we would possibly not even be able to understand that they are extraterrestrial beings, just like let's say an insect making its way upwards on my leg when I go for a walk in the forest, you know, would not be able to understand that I am an intelligent sentient being, you know, because I'm just too big. So I think the relation between the extraterrestrials and us may be like that, the relation between an ant researcher and an ant, or in the worst case, like the relation between a farmer and the hens in his barn.
Interesting. We'll have to wind up soon, but I just wanted to ask you, have you had any sightings or close encounters of your own?
No, I've never seen a UFO.
Okay. And if a UFO landed and you're invited to go on board, would you?
Depends if I can go first class. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. It really depends. I mean, of course, I would be very, very interested to get to know them, but yeah. As I said, you know, I don't believe in those extraterrestrial visitors anymore. You know, I think this is a superior kind of intelligence, and that maybe we are part of their simulation. Maybe we are part of their experiment. And so I think I think we have to think about the whole issue completely again, you know, in a completely different fashion. I think it's not about visitors from other planets, but it may be, you know. And if they were, and if you tell me, okay, you'll be back in 2 weeks, you can tell your wife, okay, or you can bring your wife and your kids, you know, and we promise we'll bring you back in 2 weeks. And if they say, and if I ask, and does it look like Canary Islands with, you know, with beaches and sun and all of that, and they would go, yeah, then hell, sure, I would go, but only for 2 weeks.
Oh, well, thank you so much. This has been very enjoyable. I'd love to have you back again and pick your brain about some of more of your own personal thoughts about the subject, because
thank you.
It's a really interesting thing, I think, for everyone's broad opinions and experiences.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. And I'd also like to interview you about the UFO situation in Australia one day.
Sure, happy to. Yeah.
Yeah.